My name is Suzanne and I want to share my story. 4 years ago, my husband Daniel and I moved into our first home together after getting married. It was a small, cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing too fancy, but it was perfect for starting our life together. We were also parents to two energetic children, Emma and Jack, both under the age of 5. One of the first major things we needed to take care of was upgrading the fence around our yard. The house only had an old, flimsy chain link fence, and we wanted something sturdier and taller to keep our kids safe while they played outside. After doing some research, we found a local contractor offering a beautiful cedar fence with stylish metal toppers on the posts. The price was surprisingly reasonable, especially for how elegant it would look. We were excited about having more privacy and knowing our kids could play safely in the yard without worrying about them wandering off or someone peeking in. Like any home improvement project, we had to go through some paperwork, land surveys, town permits, and so on. Once everything was approved, the workers were scheduled to start tearing down the old fence. I remember it being a particularly dreary, rainy day when the work began, but the crew pressed on through the weather. It was impressive how committed they were to the job, despite the cold drizzle coming down. That afternoon, as the crew dismantled the old fence, there was a loud knock on our front door. It wasn't a polite knock, it was aggressive and insistent. I opened the door to find a man standing there, arms crossed with a scowl on his face. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s with a weathered skin. His clothes were worn and he had the air of someone perpetually annoyed by the world. "Why are you tearing down the fence?" he barked before I could even say hello. "Excuse me," I replied, caught off guard by his tone. "I'm your neighbor from next door." "What are you doing with the fence?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "We're replacing it," I explained, trying to keep my tone calm. "We've got young kids, and the old chain link fence doesn't feel safe enough to keep them protected while they play in the yard." His expression turned into a sneer. "Well, I don't like it. A big wooden fence will be ugly, and I don't want to have to look at it every day." I was surprised by his hostility. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but we've already gotten all the necessary approvals from the town." Without waiting for a response, I closed the door, trying not to let my frustration show. As I glanced out the window, I saw him lingering in our yard, glaring at the workers as they continued tearing down the old fence. He stayed there for a few minutes, muttering angrily under his breath before storming off. I hoped that would be the end of it, but deep down, I had a bad feeling it wouldn't be. For the next few days, things were quiet. Daniel and I were relieved, thinking maybe the grumpy neighbor had gotten over it. But then in the dead of night, our door rang. It startled us both awake, but we were too groggy to get up and investigate. We assumed it was just kids playing pranks or some kind of glitch. But the next night, it happened again. This time, Daniel jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I followed him, my heart racing. When we opened the door, no one was there. Just the dark, empty street. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was definitely messing with us. The following morning, we decided to install security cameras around the property. We figured if this continued, we'd at least have video evidence to see who was responsible. A few days later, while we were both at work, Daniel got a notification from the doorbell camera. He checked the footage and saw our neighbor, the same angry man from before, standing on our front porch, banging on the door and shouting. He was ranting about how the fence was a disgrace to the neighborhood and that he was going to make sure we paid for ruining the view. Daniel called me at work and I told him to just ignore it. I figured the guy was just blowing off steam, and once the fence was fully installed, he'd get over it. Or so I hoped. That night, as we were settling in after putting the kids to bed, Jack, our youngest, suddenly came downstairs crying. "Mummy, there's a man outside my window," he said between sobs. Daniel and I froze. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked. Trying to stay calm, Jack pointed toward the backyard. "He was looking at me through the window," he said, his voice trembling. My stomach dropped. Daniel grabbed his phone and checked the camera feed. We could see someone lurking near the back fence. The same neighbor peering through the window into Jack's room. He was crouched low, trying to stay hidden while staring into our house. "Get the kids upstairs, now," Daniel whispered. I hurried to gather both Emma and Jack and brought them to our bedroom, locking the door behind us. Daniel stayed downstairs, watching the cameras. The man lingered near the fence for what felt like hours before finally sneaking back to his own yard. I was shaken to the core. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This man was obsessed. We called the police the next morning. They came out to take a report. But since the neighbor hadn't technically done anything illegal at that moment, there wasn't much they could do except keep an eye on the situation. A few nights later, the doorbell rang again in the middle of the night. This time, when we checked the cameras, we saw the man standing on our porch with a hammer in his hand. He was hitting the side of the house, trying to break a window. I called the police, my hands trembling as I dialed. While we waited for them to arrive, we watched the footage, horrified. The man's face was twisted in anger and desperation as he muttered to himself, swinging the hammer over and over. When the police finally arrived, they caught him in the act, still standing on our porch. He didn't even try to run. Instead, he started shouting about how we had ruined the neighborhood and how he was going to tear down the fence himself if he had to. The officers arrested him on the spot, but not before he gave us a look that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were wild, full of hatred. It was like staring into the eyes of someone who had completely lost touch with reality. We pressed charges, but the entire ordeal had shaken us so badly that we couldn't stay in that house any longer. Within a few months, we sold the house and moved to a new neighborhood, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. Our new home is peaceful and quiet, and the kids are much happier here. But every so often, late at night, I think about our old neighbor. I wonder what happened to him after we left. Did he stay in that house, watching the new family who moved in? Did he find a new target for his anger? I hope wherever he is now, he's not terrorizing anyone else. But part of me can't help but worry that one day, someone else will have to deal with the neighbor from hell, and they won't know the nightmare they're about to step into.
Hi, my name is Sam. I met a girl on Tinder. Her name was Rachel. At first we clicked. She was adventurous, always eager to hike or camp, and had a love for the outdoors that matched my own. She had a 3-year-old son, Ellie, who warmed up to me quickly. Life seemed to be moving in the right direction, and after almost a year of dating, I started saving for an engagement ring. But then things began to unravel, and the person I thought I knew started showing cracks. It started when Rachel went to court to fight for custody of Ellie. She had told me her ex was a dangerous man, abusive, controlling. She said he'd held her at gunpoint and tried to run her over with his car when she attempted to leave him. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? That's what you do when you're in love. The day of the court case was tense. Before the judge entered the room, Rachel completely broke down. She sobbed uncontrollably, saying strange things like, "You win. Take him. I don't care anymore. I'll just have another baby." Her voice was loud enough to make everyone in the courtroom stop and stare. I managed to calm her down just before the judge walked in. Her lawyer did most of the talking, and despite the outburst, she managed to secure primary care with 50-50 custody. That's when I started noticing things weren't quite adding up. During that period, I found out Rachel had some assault charges in her past. She brushed it off, explaining it was just a rough patch with her ex. But the more I learned, the more questions I had about her emotional stability. Rachel didn't seem to have many friends. In fact, I'd never met any of them, despite her often mentioning them. I figured she needed a support system beyond me and her family, so I encouraged her to reconnect with them. Then one day she told me she was having a girls' night out with some high school friends. I was thrilled. Maybe she was finally reaching out and finding a way to maintain her mental health. But that girls' night never sat right with me. The details of what she did didn't add up. Curious, I talked to her parents during a visit and discovered they had no idea about this group of friends. When I confronted Rachel, she admitted there was no girls' night out. She had met a man who she claimed was an old friend from high school. They met at a McDonald's outlet and talked until 3 a.m. over coffee. I knew she was lying. That particular McDonald's outlet was closed at midnight, and they didn't even serve coffee. When I confronted her, she asked for us to be friends. Nothing more, she wanted to continue doing family activities together, but no kissing, just friends. I felt betrayed, confused, and hurt. A few days later, I broke up with her. It should have ended there. But it didn't. 3 or 4 days later, I got a frantic call from Rachel. She was crying, begging me to take her back. She refused to tell me where she was, but made it clear that she wasn't in a stable place emotionally. She even threatened to hurt herself if I didn't get back with her. She had disappeared for days, leaving Ely with her mom and vanishing without a trace. I called the hotel her number came from, which turned out to be the most expensive in town, and told them to call the police because she was clearly a danger to herself. Weeks later, I thought I was done with her drama. But Rachel wasn't finished. She showed up at my place, this time asking if we could get back together, even offering to bring another girl into the relationship to keep things exciting. I refused, disgusted by how far she was willing to go. That same day, she went to my parents' house, spewing lies. She told them that on a trip to Europe, my friend and I had shared a girl. For the record, that never happened. As you'd expect, my parents threw her out of their house. But before she left, she told my dad he should disown me because I was a terrible son. My dad's response: "I'm a hard man to get along with. If he told you bad things about me, they're probably true." Then he slammed the door in her face. I thought that would be the end of it. But no, a few weeks later, things took an even darker turn. One evening while I was visiting my parents for dinner, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neither would theirs. The calls came every few seconds. I turned my phone off, and my parents took theirs off the hook. When we finally listened to the voicemails, we realized they were all from Rachel. She was claiming to be lost in the woods behind my parents' house. She said her phone was dying and she didn't know where she was. I immediately called the police. They found her barefoot, stumbling through the forest, some 300 meters from my parents' place, near a highway. She was disoriented, crying and shivering. No shoes. Her feet were frostbitten and she had hypothermia. Even then, it wasn't over. Months went by without a word from her, and I foolishly let my guard down. I had started dating someone new, a woman who had no idea about the nightmare I'd been through. Then the calls started up again. This time Rachel claimed she was pregnant. I asked for proof, but she conveniently had a miscarriage. One cold morning after a few days of heavy snow, I came home to find footprints all over my yard. An empty bottle of rum was lying in the snow near my front door. On the floor was a book, and inside was a 15-page handwritten will. The letter was full of apologies and ramblings about how it was her fault that Ailey wouldn't have a mother anymore. I didn't even finish reading it. I immediately called the police. As I was on the phone with them, my neighbor came out. He told me that earlier that morning, he had heard someone crying under my deck. When he went to check, he found Rachel. She was freezing, her skin blue from the cold, and she had been under my deck for hours. He called an ambulance and they took her away. If it weren't for my neighbor, I would have never thought to look under the deck. If she had died there, her body would have been frozen until spring. Can you imagine explaining to the police why your ex's body was found under your deck months later? I found her car a few blocks away and called her father to pick it up. That's when her parents told me the truth. It wasn't her ex who had held a shotgun to her head or tried to run her over. It was the other way around. She was the one who had terrorized him. Her parents admitted that they had hoped I could help her get better. They knew she was unstable, manipulative, and dangerous. And that's how I realized I had narrowly escaped a complete nightmare. I hope I never cross lines with her or see her again.
Hi, my name is Nia. I know this story may sound far-fetched, but please hear me out. Every detail I'm about to share is real, and while you might question parts of it, trust me when I say that I lived through every terrifying second. Before listening to my story, make sure to subscribe to my Dark Storyman. It happened 5 years ago when I was 20. Looking back, I can't believe how close I came to something unspeakable happening that night. It all started when my friend Katie invited me over for her birthday party and sleepover. I was excited but had to work right before the party, which meant I missed most of the fun activities. By the time I arrived, everyone had already finished the games and were lounging around, trying to figure out what to do next. Since I had missed out on so much, the group decided that we should take a trip to a park about a mile away to continue the fun. It sounded harmless enough, but something in the pit of my stomach made me feel uneasy. Now, keep in mind that it was already dark, and the rain had been coming down hard for hours. The air smelled of wet pavement and pine trees, and the ground was soaked. Our group wasn't small. There were 4 of us. Katie, her friends Emily, Lucas and me. Emily and Lucas were new to me. I'd never met them before that night, but they seemed friendly enough. As we walked down the deserted streets, talking and laughing, I managed to trip on the uneven pavement and slice open my big toe on a sharp rock. Blood oozed from the gash, but I shrugged it off, hoping it wouldn't ruin the night. Little did I know that my injury would play a critical role later on. The park we were headed to was large, with 3 main hills. One hill led back to the main road and civilization, another connected the playground to a small outdoor theater, and the third led deep into a series of walking paths that disappeared under a bridge. Locals called the area under the bridge the Drain, a place infamous for being a hangout for drug dealers and vandals. It was the kind of spot you'd want to avoid, especially at night. When we finally reached the park, we immediately made our way to the playground. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still soggy. We started goofing around, playing tag and pushing each other on the swings. It felt nice to be carefree for a while, but that feeling wouldn't last long. Emily and Lucas, being a bit bolder than the rest of us, decided to hop over the fence surrounding the playground. They spotted a couple sitting on a bench nearby and, to our surprise, walked straight up to them to ask for a gum. The couple looked annoyed but gave Lucas one anyway. They left shortly after, muttering under their breath. Now we were completely alone. Around 11:30 p.m., the air started to shift. We had planned to head back to Katie's house at midnight, but I began feeling uneasy. That's when I noticed him. A tall man, maybe in his mid-30s, was walking along the fence that surrounded the playground. He was broad-shouldered, with long, shaggy hair and oversized clothes that clung awkwardly to his frame. His eyes seemed distant, and his gait was unsteady, like someone who didn't quite belong in his own skin. His presence alone was enough to make my heart race, but what happened next would be seared into my memory forever. Katie, without thinking, called out, "Oh, look, it's a druggie." The man's head snapped toward us, and a deep scowl creased his face. His eyes darkened, locking onto us like a predator sizing up its prey. The air around us thickened with tension. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if deciding we weren't worth his time, He turned and continued walking. But the damage was done. We felt it. The shift in the atmosphere, the danger that now lurked just beyond the shadows. Maybe we should head back now, I suggested, trying to mask the rising panic in my voice. The others agreed, but Lucas and Emily seemed disappointed that we were leaving before midnight. As we began walking back, a flash of light illuminated the path behind us. We turned, expecting to see a police officer checking up on us since we were out past curfew. But it wasn't a cop, it was the same man from before. Only now he was walking directly toward us, and in his hand he held a trash bag, a flashlight, and something long and metallic. I didn't wait to see what it was. Run, I shouted. My injured toe, the wet grass, and my flimsy sandals made running nearly impossible. My foot kept slipping, and I could feel the warm trickle of blood soaking into my sandal as I tried to keep pace with the others. We sprinted toward the hill that led to the drain, our hearts pounding louder than our footsteps. We thought we had outpaced him, but we were wrong. We huddled together, panting, under the cover of some trees. Katie, her voice shaking, whispered, "Did you see that? He had a knife, I hadn't seen it, but the fear in everyone's eyes told me enough. Let's hide in the drain," suggested Lucas. He was panicking, and for a moment, the idea sounded good. It was a well-hidden spot. Maybe the man wouldn't find us there. But something in my gut screamed that it was a terrible idea. I had listened to enough true crime stories to know how hiding in a secluded spot usually ended. "Are you crazy?" I whispered harshly. "We need to go up the hill, where there are people. We can scream for help if we need to." The group hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're right," Katie agreed. We started to formulate a plan. Lucas would pretend we were going to the drain, hoping to trick the man if he was listening, while the rest of us would head straight for the road. Unfortunately, it didn't work. As we started running up the hill, I glanced back and saw the flashlight beam sweeping over us again. He had followed us. We made a mad dash for the nearby gas station, our feet slipping on the wet grass and pavement. I could feel the panic rising in my throat as we burst through the gas station doors, breathless and terrified. We immediately scattered, hiding behind shelves and ducking out of sight. Lucas went to the counter and explained what was happening to the cashier, describing the man and asking if we could stay there for a while. The cashier, a middle-aged guy with a calm demeanor, agreed and offered to call the police. "No, we don't need the cops," Lucas said quickly. "He's just creepy." Katie and I exchanged a look. "Are you serious?" She hissed under her breath. "We could get in trouble for curfew, but at least we won't get stabbed." Despite our fear, we didn't call the police. Instead, we waited, crouched in the aisles, watching the windows. After about 15 minutes, we felt safe enough to leave. I used some napkins to dry off my sandals and wrapped one around my still bleeding toe. But as soon as we stepped outside, Emily gasped. "Oh my God, he's back!" We all whipped around, and sure enough, there he was. But now he had a shiny knife in his hand, which I could see clearly. The same man, the same flashlight, the same knife. My heart sank. We bolted. This time I stayed near Katie. She couldn't run as fast as the others, and I couldn't leave her behind. Emily and Lucas slowed down to help too. We didn't stop running until we reached Katie's house. By the time we made it inside, the man was gone, and we were safe. For now. We never saw him again that night, but the experience left us all shaken. The group wasn't the same after that. I never saw Emily or Lucas again. But something had shifted between us, something unspoken. To this day, I don't know what that man wanted or why he followed us. But every now and then when I'm walking alone at night, I can still feel the weight of his stare, and I'll quicken my pace just in case. Stay safe out there, because you never know who's watching. Thank you for your time, and make sure you subscribe to my Dark Storyman for more scary stories like these. This is going to sound strange, but hear me out. When I was in high school, there was a guy who convinced everyone he wasn't exactly human. To this day, I feel uneasy even writing his name, So let's just call him Derek. His real name, though, sounded like something out of a dark fairy tale, like a character from some old gothic novel. Derek was an outsider, no doubt. He had this odd, vacant look in his eyes that made people, even teachers, uncomfortable. He wore the same faded black hoodie every day, hood up, and never seemed to take it off, like a uniform of isolation. I don't think he ever washed it, either. The smell was, well, it's something I can't forget. Derek wasn't tall or particularly strong, just an average-looking guy you'd forget about if it weren't for his unsettling presence. He always wore these huge, black sunglasses, even indoors, and by the time we were seniors, the teachers had stopped telling him to remove them. I guess they gave up because Derek didn't listen to anyone. Now, here's where it gets weird. Derek didn't have any friends, but he had this strange habit of adopting people. If he liked you, and it seemed random, he'd walk up and say, "You're adopted now." It was like being part of his invisible circle, and supposedly this meant you were safe from whatever he thought he was. At the time, we all thought it was just some creepy game, but for the few of us he adopted, it started to feel like something darker. I was one of the unlucky ones. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was because Derek had a crush on me. Another girl, my friend Naomi, had also been adopted. Derek's crush on her was even more obvious, and it made things feel even weirder. One afternoon, I was hanging out with Naomi and a couple of other friends, Jake and Emily, behind a school near the old baseball field. We were just messing around, talking about nothing important, when the conversation shifted to Derek. Jake was teasing Naomi about how Derek was always staring at her, and we all started laughing about it. We had a nickname for Derek because using his real name just felt wrong. But this time, Emily slipped up and used his real name. The moment she said it the third time, something shifted in the air. I swear to you, out of nowhere, Derek appeared on top of the dugout, holding a baseball bat. It wasn't just that he showed up, it was the way he did it. Silent, motionless, he just stared at us, his sunglasses hiding whatever expression was on his face. We stopped laughing immediately, unsure if he had heard us. I gave him a nervous wave, and he nodded at me, then jumped down and walked away, as if nothing had happened. We all laughed it off afterward, but deep down, something felt wrong. A few weeks later, something even creepier happened. I was hanging out at Naomi's house. We were upstairs in her room, just chatting, when once again, Derek's name came up. Naomi joked about how weird he was, and without thinking, we said his name 3 times during the conversation. 10 minutes later, we heard the front door slam shut. Startled, we went downstairs, thinking maybe another friend had come over. To our shock, standing in the living room, casually talking to Naomi's mom, was Derek. My heart sank. Naomi's mom asked him what he was doing there, and without missing a beat, Derek replied, "I was summoned." Naomi and I exchanged horrified glances. Her mom, being her usual friendly self, didn't seem alarmed and politely asked Derek to leave, which he did without another word. As soon as the door closed, we bolted back upstairs, whispering in terror. We didn't want to believe it, but it felt like Derek had appeared because we said his name. By the next day, our whole group knew about the incident, and we all made a pact. Never say Derek's name 3 times again. For a while, things were quiet. No strange encounters, no unexpected appearances. I began to convince myself it was just a series of bizarre coincidences, but then one night everything changed. My friends and I were hanging out at Jake's house. It was a normal evening. We were on his back porch, just joking around. Of course, the conversation turned to Derek again, and we warned Jake not to say his name 3 times. Jake, always the skeptic, laughed it off and deliberately said Derek's name 3 times, mocking us. At first nothing happened, and Jake grinned, thinking he had proven us wrong. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Derek. He had jumped over Jake's fence and was standing at the edge of the yard, staring at us. Jake's smile vanished. We all went silent, frozen in place, as Derek just watched us. Then, without saying a word, he disappeared back over the fence. Jake was freaked out. He accused us of setting him up, but we were just as terrified as he was. He told us all to leave, his bravado gone, and for the first time he seemed genuinely scared, but that wasn't the worst of it. The final encounter with Derek was the one that made me fear for my life. It happened a few months after the incident at Jake's house. I was home alone on a stormy night. My parents were out of town, and I had invited a guy over, someone I had been casually seeing. We were in my room, watching the rain pour outside when the conversation somehow drifted to Derek. I told him the whole story, about the strange occurrences and the way Derek always showed up when his name was said. He laughed, of course, and then, despite my begging, he screamed Derek's name 3 times at the top of his lungs. Instantly, the storm outside intensified. Thunder cracked so loud I jumped, and then lightning lit up the sky. I ran to the window and froze. Standing in the driveway, staring up at my window, was a figure. It was hard to see through the rain, but I knew it was him, Derek. I panicked. I ran downstairs, making sure every door and window was locked. But as I peered out the front door, there he was, standing in my yard, not moving. I started yelling, "I'm adopted. I'm adopted. I'm adopted." Hoping that would somehow protect me, though deep down I knew it wouldn't. After what felt like forever, Derek was gone. The storm raged on, but the figure had disappeared into the night. The next morning, when I finally had the courage to check the yard, I found something disturbing, a hoodie. Derek's hoodie, lying in the corner of my backyard. Wrapped inside were some of my things, items I thought I had lost. I don't know how he got them or why he left them there, but I was too scared to think straight. After that, Derek never came back to school. He vanished just like he had always appeared, without warning. No one knew where he went, and no one seemed to care. But for me, his memory lingers. I still can't explain how he always seemed to be there, just when we said his name. Maybe it was all in our heads, or maybe he really was something more than just a troubled kid. All I know is, wherever Derek is now, I hope he never comes back.